Hi, Virginia. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm very, very excited.
Yeah.
We're excited too. We get to talk to you about fluency, which is one of our favorite topics, and you're one of our favorite teachers. We're so excited.
Oh, stop.
But we actually get this question a lot, so we really wanted to have you on to talk about it because we have a ton of episodes about fluency, but we have not talked about fluency specifically in K2. And a lot of people ask questions like, should we even be talking about fluency in K2? Like the kids are just learning how to read. So and if we do, what does it look like for those youngest learners? So how would you, as a first grade teacher, how would you define fluency at that primary grade level?
So I have to say, I think fluency is a long time coming for this conversation. I'm not really sure why it has had a backseat, but it's incredibly important throughout the grades. I teach first, and for my little ones, I say all the time, if you want to see the importance of fluency, spend a couple of seconds with a disfluent reader. And as you watch them struggle through whatever it is they're trying to read, it's so clear that there's no chance that they're going to be able to comprehend it. So in first grade and in the lower grades, it really begins. My biggest job is the foundational skills that I'm directly teaching them. If you can't read fluently if you can't read. So decoding is absolutely part of fluency. And my actual goal with phonics and with foundational teaching is to eventually getting them to unphonics for that automaticity part. So fluency in K2, I guess to answer your question, I don't know if I've gotten there yet, but the fluency for even in kindergarten through 2 is that they can read the words automatically and that it sounds pretty, and that they have the prosody of it. And once they can do that, that absolutely, as Tim Rosinski says, it's the bridge to comprehension. But it is. So once they can actually read it, then they can read it fluently, and then they can comprehend it better.
And for most of your kids, though, I mean, they're probably coming into first grade. Most of them, I would say, probably are just fluent readers, like generally.
Yes, actually. Yeah, I think that's safe to say, and it's one of the reasons why I'm incredibly partial to first grade. We talked about this a little bit before, but I essentially get kindergartners, and I do all that I need to do in first grade, and I pass them off into second grade. So it's an incredibly important year for fluency, but it's not. So it is their decoding, but fluency also begins with me reading those fantastic read-alouds with that rich literature and modeling what fluency sounds like. It also has a lot to do with their oral language. It's not an option that the kids don't speak in full sentences with me. All of these things also lead to fluency. When I'm doing the read-alouds, as we all do, what's better than sitting in a rocking chair with a bunch of cute little kids sitting in front of you, looking up as you're doing the read-aloud, and the voices and what we do with our voice is just a ton of fun. But I also make sure to point out to the kids what is happening with my voice. Like if I'm reading a particular story and I use an accent or just, exaggerate that exclamation mark, I will stop and I'll say to them, like, did you love that? Like, was that just so much fun to listen to? And even that, it's just planting the seed of how much reading fluently will help them down the road. So yes, when they first come in, it's absolutely the top part of the rope that I'm focusing on with fluency, but it's really the bottom part of the rope that we'll be working on together to eventually, every strand, the very point of every single strand is fluency. So the fact that we don't talk about it more is somewhat bananas because that's truly the end goal for the top and the bottom of the rope. But it looks very different. So I do teach fluency purposefully. I have a shared reading portion of the day. We just started bookworms, and I'm loving this shared reading portion. It is the direct objective is for the kids to read fluently. And it starts off with, as most things do, I am reading to them first, and they are either core reading, which means they're reading with me, or they echo read, which means I read, and then they read right after me. So they are practicing fluency with me as they're hearing me and doing it at the same time. And then they work with their partner and they read it for several minutes. And by the time they're done, every kid is fluent in what they're reading, and they are definitely understanding what they're reading because they're not getting jammed up by being unable to read. And I also, with the foundational curriculum that I use, is I teach the skills that we work on the skills, and then we have the decodable passage. So the big difference is there is direct instruction of what's going to be in the passage. So I'm not using the passage as a reading instrument. I'm using it as a reinforcement of what we just learned. So even with the decodable passages, I read it to them first. I focus on my voice. We talk about how we read like we talk. And I do a core read with that as well, even with their decodables. And then they will spend several minutes partner reading the decodable as well. So they are partner reading and practicing with both a decodable and authentic text. That's just a little bit harder during that shared reading portion of the day.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm wondering, Virginia, if you can kind of talk a little bit more like how you weave it into each area, right? So I heard you say that foundational skills, you're using decodable text to practice, I assume, phonics patterns, that you've taught, and you're keeping fluency in mind. And then in shared reading, you're using texts that are rich, that are worthy of reading aloud. Are there any specific strategies you use during either, your decodable text time or your shared reading time, or anything else that you think would be really helpful for our listeners to know?
Sure. So for the partner read, the way that they're partnered is not a coincidence. It's typically one student is just a little bit higher than the other, but we've spent a lot of time before they start going over what exactly does partner read look like and sound like, right? So they, I'll say to the kids before I send them off, okay, when you read, I want you to make your voices, and they say, beautiful. And then we say, if there's a question mark, our voices will go, and they say up, and I say, when there's an exclamation mark, we will read and they say very excitedly. And then I say, however, we're not going to, and then they have to reply back with, yell at you. That's why, Jan Hasbrook, and I love this, she says, read like you're speaking, which I think we sometimes get away from that because, when the kids go to read and there's an exclamation mark, it's like the sky is falling. It's like, no, Mom just said dinner's ready. That's it. Our voice only really needs to match what we're reading. And also pointing along is incredibly important as they read. And when they're reading with a partner, I'll say to them, so if you're stuck in a word, you will, and they answer me, take a minute. Because oftentimes their partner will just jump right in, but they really just need to take a minute to remember what we just learned. And once they know they're not going to get it, that's when they ask their partner, and their partner is always more than happy to help. Children are just the best. They're generous and kind, and it's in their nature to just want to do what's best for each other, and it really comes out in the classroom all day, every day.
That's exciting. And we just talked to Jake Downs, who told us all about the research behind this kind of paired reading. So look at you doing some research-based activities.
Look
right
at
there.
that, research-based. What do you know? That's the way of the future,
evidence-based, I guess.
Yeah, no, and I will say this is the first time that I've done direct fluency instruction. It's always just sort of been I knew that I was doing it in my mind, but I wasn't specific with them that this is exactly what we're doing. And I'm really seeing big strides, particularly in my lower kids with their reading. And if you really are stuck on a word, even at our age, if I'm reading a book that has characters and I can't read their name because it's got lots of vowels because they're maybe from a different culture than I'm used to, I stop, and there goes my comprehension. There goes my decoding. And I always try to remember that when the kids are stuck on a word, it's like, well, they're going to stop right there. And their comprehension is going to stop right there too. So this practice is just truly the bridge to comprehension for them.
Virginia, I'm curious about with the partner reading, how long are the texts that you have them read? And does that change over? I just feel like first grade, like the beginning of first grade to the end of first grade is like such a difference in where they are as readers.
It is. It's amazing. So to start with, when I first started doing it, we were doing Danny the Dinosaur, which is not a ton of words per page. The font is nice and big. There is a picture for them. And now when we come back from break, I'll be starting on Frog and Toad Are Friends. So you can see the, you can see the progression of the text. So it definitely increases in complexity and even words on page.
Yeah. I imagine too, you're really like that helps to build that perseverance, that stamina that we always talk about, right? That you're really doing that in first grade across the year. And those texts that you just mentioned really show that.
Right. Definitely. Yeah. And that whole, the one thing I don't give, and I just read an article on this about tracking the words and pointing along. And I couldn't tell if I should stop or not, but it is so important for them to track particularly when they're partner reading, because that's really when they know, it's the only way that's how they're going to know when the other partner is, stuck or not. But I love that reading finger.
Do you have a song to share with us about that? Or maybe you could sing it to us. Do you want to sing it to us?
Oh, Lori, listen, literacy community, don't ever doubt my commitment to you. All right. Do I love you or do I hate you for this?
I have sang on this, as this is coming from someone else who's also sang on this podcast before. So I hand you the baton, the singing baton. Go ahead.
So it goes a little something like this. If you're reading and you know it, point along. If you're reading and you know it, point along. Let my fingers track the word. Listen carefully what you've heard. If you're reading and you know it, point along. Wait. Every song has to end in a wait, or else it doesn't count.
It doesn't count.
So just to let your listeners know, both Lori and Melissa were dancing for me. So I appreciate you both.
Cheering you on.
Totally.
But it is really important. We joke, but tracking the words really is key for them at this grade.
Yeah,
and having a really fun song to do it with is great too.
I have so many philosophies at this stage of my career, and one of the biggest philosophies that I have is if you can say it, sing it. Right? If you can stand there, dance there. If you can walk, skip. We just lean into who they are. And actually, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I do poems too for their fluency, and we sing all of them. And singing is huge for prosody, and prosody is how your voice sounds, which we've already touched on a little bit. And the singing leads so beautifully into their prosody.
Yeah, I actually, one of the things you're making me think about is an article that Tim Rosinski wrote called Let's Bring Back the Magic of Song. And it's basically about that, right? Like incorporating the idea of song into building fluency. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that.
Well, and I actually use it throughout the day. So again, one of the other things that are big for me with my fluency is poems. And I do it for so many reasons. One, they love it. Two, I can use it for some content learning. I'll align it with whatever I'm doing in my knowledge building. And I also use it a lot for just even classroom management. If they're a little bit noisy, I can use my voice and remind them that I need them to quiet down. Or I can just start singing. This week we're studying caterpillars, and the song is My Tummy is Fat. And it goes on and on and on. But so I can either remind them, or I can just start to sing My Tummy is Fat. And before you know it, we have a rousing rendition of My Tummy is Fat till the end. And they're all lined up beautifully with big smiles. Fun. Much more fun. And there's learning too.
Yeah. Can't forget the joy in teaching. Thank you.
I know.
I'm wondering.
It's impossible.
I know that you mentioned both read-alouds and shared reading. And I know we've talked about it on the podcast before, but I still feel like people get confused about the difference between those two. Can you talk about how you use both of them for fluency and what the difference is between your read-alouds and your shared reading?
Sure. So read-alouds, it's me, right? The focus is on me, and the focus is on me reading. And I am reading the story to them while they're sitting and enjoying and listening.
And it's purposeful still.
And it's purposeful, and the books are usually chosen for very good reasons. Again, it could either be what we're learning about in content. It could just be a seasonal book, or it could just be a very, very fun book. But whatever it is, it's chosen for a very specific reason that day. So it's a read aloud. I'm reading to them. And again, focusing on my voice, focusing on my own oral language. There's lots of turn and talk so that they're developing their own oral language. But the focus is really, or the person doing the reading is me. As opposed to the shared reading, every student has, depending on how much I have in a class set, but every student will have their own book, or they'll have a book with a partner. And as I'm reading, they are following, tracking that word, tracking those words, and they're following along. So that way and then it is that book that they will use to do a partner read with. Did that help?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I'm seeing like different layers of support here, right? The oral reading, the read alouds, they're just taking it in for language comprehension, right? The top part of the rope, they're getting just whatever knowledge, the vocabulary, the syntax, and whatever you're doing for fluency, right? There's a lot that they're taking in every day from you. And then for the shared reading and the partnered reading, that's their time to practice with a text that might be at not that same level, might be a little bit.
Just a bump up.
Right.
A little bit of a bump up, yeah.
Yeah, but the shared reading and the paired reading is where the one that they can grasp.
Yes, with the same text that I just read.
Oh, it's the same exact text?
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Great.
So they'll have in the
better.
shared reading they have their own copy of whatever I'm reading.
Gotcha.
So they're following along as I read it. Yeah.
That's excellent. So like different layers of support to get them to fluent reading on their own.
Right. And that's all whole group. And I even, I touch on fluency in small group. I always refer to it as like fluency by happenstance when I do it in my small group. I know I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but truly my job is to, when I pull kids into small group, I'm doing it for their foundational piece. It's so important. I do both sides of the rope all day long, but my small group really is focused on their decoding and helping any child that is just not getting that phonics pattern. But even when I'm doing my small group, there's fluency built into the small group. They can, if they're reading their decodable and they are not reading fluent, I'll stop and I'll say, listen to me. And I will read it fluently. I'm like, now it's your turn. So even though my goal of a small group isn't fluency, I absolutely touch on it. So I'll read, I'll model, they will read it again. I will change up what we're reading in small groups. So Reader's Theater is a fantastic tool for fluency. It really gives them no choice because and they love it and they embrace whatever character they have that day in the theater. They're ham bones. They work it. So even what they're reading, I will do poetry in small group and again, lean into that fluency, but I am sitting at that table for the decodable piece for most of the year. And now, we're going into spring and they've done a fantastic job and they've worked hard all year. And now they don't have to focus as much on the decoding because they've done that beautifully all year. And now they are a lot more automatic. So now, even in my small group, we're moving away from decodables a lot, and we're using, non-controlled, authentic text. And I can do a lot more fluency with there. I will even, tee them up to make sure they are fluent. I will pre-teach vocabulary if necessary, because if they're not sure what the word is, again, there's that jam up, and then there goes that automaticity, and there goes their prosody. So even in small groups, fluency is there. It's just not the main objective. It's just a sub-objective. I think I just made that word up, but it works.
Potentially.
You can use it. You can have it.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Before we I want to dive a little deeper into a couple of things you just said. And I think a good thing to do first might be to quickly kind of recap. So we're talking about shared reading. We're talking about read alouds as you reading to the students. The students do not have a copy of the book. You have a copy of the book and are holding it up. They're hearing you model it. Shared reading, the students might be sharing a copy. They might have their own copy, and you're reading, they're tracking along. Yes, that's their track time. And then they have this time where they're doing this partner reading, And during that partner reading, they could be reading the book that you read for shared reading, and right, that you modeled and that you practiced with them. And then you didn't say this exactly, but I'm wondering also in the partner reading, is it also decodable books? Or yeah.
Yes, it's actually both every day.
Okay.
So my shared reading portion of the day, that's when they have their copy of whatever I'm reading, and they are reading out loud along with me. It's either an echo read where I read first, they listen, and then they repeat what I've just said. We all do that together. Or it's a choral read where we are reading at the same time. And then they take that book that we just tracked together and they go off with their partner. And that's when they read together. And that's when I'm walking around and you know, helping anyone that's a little more just fluent. But they really do, they do a really great job. But that's my role then, is to just sort of, you know, roam and hover. And then, so that's the shared reading portion. And then during the foundational piece, I introduce a phonics pattern. And then we read a decodable text together, sort of similar. I will read it, they will choral read, or they will echo read. I also do this thing, I call it a head start, where I'll just start to read a little bit and they jump in right behind me. So they're like 2 to 3 or 4 words behind me. So after we have read that decodable text together, that's when they go off and read it with their partner. So they do both. They partner read with a shared text, and then they partner read with a decodable text.
You're making my head spin with the head start. How does that work?
I'll just start. So if the text is, I always think of row, row, row your boat. It's sort of like that.
Yeah, like
but it's
rounds.
just a little bit faster.
Okay.
Yes. So if I've started the first, you know, once upon a time, I say time and they're saying once. So they're just like a little bit behind me. So they can kind of hear what I'm saying, and then they're just tagging along.
Interesting.
Oh, all right.
Interesting.
Thank you for teaching me something new today.
You're welcome. I have to say it's not my favorite.
I feel like I might get a little lost in it, but maybe
Yes.
I haven't ever experienced it, so I don't know.
Yeah, I do that more small group because there's just 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah. That makes
You know,
sense.
that are looking at me with
Not
the big
so many
eyes. So
voices.
I don't typically do that one whole group.
Okay.
That makes sense. All right, so can we talk a little bit more about your small groups then? Since we've clarified everything that happens in whole group, talk to us about, is there any, like, do you choose your small groups? Like, who is working in your small groups for any particular reason? Are you looking for things during their partner reading? And then, then what do you do? How do they work?
I say often that whoever needs me the most gets me the most. And in first grade, particularly the beginning of first grade, who needs me the most are the kids who are struggling with anything that's going to get in their way of decoding. So any kid that is not, that just is struggling with any of the diagraphs or any of the grapheme phoneme correspondence, that's who I tend to pull into a group together. Every Friday I do progress monitoring, and I use that data for my next week's groups. Or I also say this a lot, my greatest tool for assessment is my eyes and my ears and my understanding of my students. So I pull my kids into small groups to work more on that decoding piece, phoneme, grapheme correspondence. We do a lot with Elkonin boxes. You know, we do a lot with blending and segmenting, and then they will always have a decodable piece at the end of the small group. And even with that decodable piece, I shouldn't say I expect fluency. I hope for fluency from them. And if they're not fluent, we will always go back until they are fluent. Oftentimes it takes about 3 reads for the student to read something fluently. But so again, it's not my goal is that when they are reading that decodable passage, they are able to decode the skills that we just worked on. Once they can, that's when they can move into the fluency piece. But I never just say, you know, I have a fluency group and I'm pulling them for fluency. I pull them for direct instruction, and fluency is always the end goal.
Yeah, and like you want them to get to the place where they're automatic, right? They're reading those words
The
automatically.
unphonicsing. That's my goal. The unphonicsing part.
I love that word.
You can use that too. There you go. 2 for 2.
And like you said, I mean, the best way to do that is the repetition, right? Them seeing more and more words and more words with that pattern. So the repetition is what you need, and once they get it, that's when they'll be fluent.
Right, and it's the word study is the link to automaticity, and then the automaticity is the link to prosody and rate and everything else. So it's, it is a continuum, and that's why, we always go back to the rope, the literacy geeks that we are, right? It all comes back to the rope, but it's all the strands that weave into the one.
Yeah. Okay. So when we weave those strands together, you mentioned prosody, you mentioned expression today. We know that we want students to read like they talk, right? Out loud. So when you do your modeling or you do group practice, what do you use to build that expression? And I know earlier you mentioned song, but I want to make sure that we get in some other tips for our teachers that you use in your classroom.
Well, honestly, particularly in this small group, it's really modeling, and it's not always me modeling. If I have 3 kids in the group and one of my little ones just, nailed it and his or her voice was smooth and beautiful, I'll stop and I was like, oh man, could we just take a minute? Could you do that again? And the other kids are like, that was amazing. Yeah. So I model a ton. The kids model a ton, but also again with the oral language and always talking in full sentences, literally everything brings us to the end goal of fluency. I can't stress poems and I can't stress songs enough. And again, I talked earlier about, pre-teaching vocabulary. Anything that we can do to make the partner read easier for them is moving them faster to the fluency piece. It's not rate so much. It's more the automaticity. I don't necessarily want them to read fast. For me, if I read too fast, I have to stop and I have to go back and read it all over again because I wasn't attending. I'm like, what did I just read? And I have to start all over again. And, we talked about this briefly too with rate. Even within ourselves, our rate changes for ourselves. If I'm reading, if I'm reading a book, I read one way. If I have to sign a contract, I'm slowing that down and I am attending to every single word. Anyway, I just got off topic. So I guess really, honestly, everything, all roads sort of lead to fluency, and language is everything in K2. And how we speak to the students, again, even with us, always in full sentences. With their writing, if they write in fragments, I have them read it out loud. And then we talk about how that's not fluent. As your reader, I can't read fluently if you are writing in fragments and you're not writing in full sentences. So it even touches into writing.
So interesting. I'm going to ask you a selfish question because I have a kindergartner, an end of year kindergartner, going into first grade soon. And what I see with him with fluency, I wouldn't expect him to be where your kiddos are yet. But
right.
When I'm thinking of his fluency, I am thinking of things knowing the letters and the sounds those letters make quickly, being able to probably decode some words accurately, but he's not super quick on most of them yet. But I'm wondering, your take on kindergarten, since you get kindergartners into your first grade classroom. Is that the kind of fluency? And I was thinking about with the writing too, because I'm thinking his writing is getting faster and faster. Is that the level of where kindergarten is for fluency? What would you expect for kindergarten?
Yes, actually, and he's in great shape.
Oh,
I mean, if he knows, well, Melissa's his mom. You will read. You know how much time I
don't push it a lot. I try to just support what he brings home.
Yeah, no, but that's exactly right. I mean, like I said before, you can't read fluently if you can't read, right? So our first job in kindergarten, particular kindergarten, is teaching them to read, and it's teaching them the sound symbol relationship, and that that is the first road to fluency for our little guys, along with the rich language and learning new vocabulary. And, you know, even in kindergarten, they can do a shared reading. They're just doing it with a lot less words on the page. And the kindergarten teachers are talking about how their voices are beautiful and not sounding like robots, even, you know, with the little ones, but particularly when they're modeling. You know, for me, I bring a lot of attention to how it sounded. And we talk about, like, I'll even say, why did you love that so much when I read, or if another friend reads? You know, they're picking up on each other when they read fluently. But I'm digressing. Yes, you answered your own question. Everything you said is what I would have said.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I didn't want kindergarten teachers to hear, because we said kind of K2. I didn't want kindergarten teachers to feel like, is that what I'm supposed to be doing? Like, are they where
right.
Virginia's is talking about? But not quite, right? Like
right.
a lot of the same things probably happening, but at a different level.
Well, right. And that's what you know, to just repeat myself a little, but in one, I'm bringing in kindergartners and I'm sending off second graders. I know, right. I apologize for the repeat, but that's why the beginning of my year, my fluency focus is very heavy on the foundation piece. And it's only now, as I am about to exit second graders, that I can do a lot more with fluency. So there is fluency. It's just the kindergarten world fluency. And in second grade, it's, you know, it will look so much different, and they'll be more talking about the morphology of it all, as opposed to like the heavy foundational piece that I'm giving them. It's an interesting perspective, first grade. I really love it.
So much happens in those three
so
grade
much
levels.
Happens.
It's amazing.
Lots of teeth falling out, though. That's the only downside. Literally just falling out.
Just things falling out of your face. Sure.
I have a song for that too, by the way, but no.
Oh, we don't get that one.
I mean, I would.
Oh,
well, I mean, I feel like you have to do it now.
Now you have to.
Yeah, girls, you owe me. I need more swag. Okay.
We were just talking about that. Okay.
Ta-ra-ra-boom-de-ay, I lost my tooth today. I know that it's okay, 'cause baby teeth don't stay. Ta-ra-ra-boom-de-ay, new teeth will come my way. They'll grow in any day. Hip, 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 hip.
Hooray!
Woohoo! What? I've actually called families at home to sing that after the summer if they didn't lose a tooth in first grade.
Oh, that's so
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, it's a rite of passage, I guess, in Mooney's room, I guess.
Aw.
Amazing.
Okay, so I feel like you've packed this episode full of hot tips, but is there anything else that you haven't shared that you feel like you want teachers to know about making sure, like tips to make sure that every student gets that meaningful fluency practice?
That's a great question. I think sort of to bring us all the way back to how you started this and how, you know, you're trying to shine the light on it more. And I think the tip that I would give is move it up in your toolkit. You know, if it's not already prominent, just give it a place of prominence and you know, just think, how are you weaving it in? I truly believe when we do read alouds, we all are. I mean, it's our sweet spot as K2 teachers. You know, it's just so much fun, but it's almost impossible not to. But even in your decoding and anytime they're reading, I would always bring it back. Like even when I'm doing a choral read with my decodables, or if I have a sentence displayed, it's like, okay, whose turn? Who wants to read it like they're talking? And, you know, kids will take a turn and we'll all be like, that's amazing. So it really has been weaved throughout my day, but because I bumped it up in order of priority. So just move it up in your toolkit.
That's what I wrote down on my little sticky note here, which I often do, which was just hearing you talk about how it's not like you do a little fluency time for like 20 minutes. Like I have a little fluency block. And that's when we do our fluency. But you really just talked about how no matter, even if fluency isn't something you've done before, yes, I can't imagine there's a K2 teacher out there that's not reading aloud to students.
Right.
but you can just kind of switch the focus, not even switch the focus, just like add a focus layer of, okay, fluency. Let me talk to them about my voice and what that sounds like, and bring that attention to the fluency. As I'm sure most teachers are already doing it, but just bringing students' attention to it. Right. And same with, like, I'm sure they're practicing their decoding somewhere, but bringing that fluency layer into it. And I love that, because, we talk about it all the time that, even though we have these like pillars of reading, they overlap so much, and you have to bring them together. That's the whole point of the rope, right? Is bringing them together. So thank you for sharing all the ways you do that.
And it really is fluency. I mean, the goal is comprehension, but it's fluency that gets us to comprehension. And just one last thought that I hadn't listed that you made me think of. So my students use the word fluency. They know it, and they will read with each other, and they will say, that was very fluent. They're listening for it in each other. So even that vocabulary, there's no word that you can't throw at a kid that they can't grasp typically. I just put typically in so that I don't get emails with some word that some student never understood. I'm like, typically. But they know what fluency is, because we talk about it, and we aim for it, and we look for it in each other, and they look for it in me.
We love that. Love it.
So good.
Well, yeah. Thank you so much, Virginia, for sharing all these great tips and all these things you do in your classroom, and bringing this idea of what fluency can look like in the K-2 classroom. Now we know.
Thank you guys for everything that you've done. You've been instrumental, truly, in this community and getting the information out there.
Oh, thank you.
As have you.
You have too. Big time.
Thanks, guys.